She never heard it coming. Rosa Lewis had just pulled into her apartment complex at 1:30 in the morning, exhausted after a long shift, ready to finally close her eyes and sleep. The night was quiet. The parking lot was still. And then 4 bullets tore through the driver's side window and ripped into the left side of her torso. By the time her roommate called 911, Rosa's blood pressure was already dropping. The paramedics who loaded her into the ambulance that night whispered to investigators what no one wanted to say out loud. She wasn't going to make it. But here's what made this moment different from every other shooting in East Point, Georgia that year. Rosa Lewis wasn't a random victim. She was a probation officer. And she was the 5th person shot by the same killer, a methodical, calculating gunman who left handwritten notes at his crime scenes, signed in yellow highlighter, and went by a single name, Jack. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back to the beginning. 7 miles south of Atlanta sits East Point, Georgia, a quiet city. Population 40,000. The kind of place where neighbors know each other's cars, where people leave their windows open on warm spring nights, where the sound of gunfire feels like something that happens somewhere else. East Point averages 6 to 8 homicides a year. Not a war zone, not even close. But in the spring of 2001, something deeply wrong was moving through this city's streets, and no one knew it yet. It began on March 1st, 2001, when a man grew worried about his mother. He called her every single day. That was their routine, a daily phone call, nothing unusual, just a son checking in on his mom. But on this particular day, she didn't pick up. He called again. Nothing. So he drove to her house to check on her in person. What he found changed everything. There were signs of foul play. Then he found her car, and inside that car, he made a discovery so horrific that East Point Police and Lieutenant Russell Popham were on the scene within minutes. The victim was a woman. She had been shot multiple times, and based on the condition of the body, investigators estimated she had been lying there for approximately 24 hours, meaning someone had killed her the night before, and no one had known. Her name was Pamela Clark, and she was a probation officer with the state of Georgia's Department of Corrections, responsible for supervising a caseload of anywhere from 70 to 100 probationers at any given time, men and women who had committed serious crimes and who answered to her. Lieutenant Popham noted immediately that robbery wasn't the motive. Her car was still there. Her pocketbook was untouched. Whoever had done this hadn't come for her money. They had come specifically for her. East Point Police, stretched thin with limited forensic resources, requested assistance from both the FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. FBI Special Agent Pete McFarlane arrived with equipment many local departments simply didn't have. Luma lights, fingerprint processing kits, the tools to tear a crime scene apart at the molecular level. What the scene told them was chilling. The killer had fired directly through the car window at nearly point-blank range. Glass had actually embedded itself into Pamela Clark's face from the impact. Agent McFarlane described it plainly. It was an execution. The kind of killing that doesn't happen in the heat of the moment. The kind that requires someone to walk up to a car, raise a weapon, and pull the trigger while looking through glass at another human being. And despite multiple shots fired, there was not a single shell casing on the ground. That meant one of two things. The shooter used a revolver, which ejects no casings, or he was careful enough to collect every single one before leaving. Either way, this was not impulsive. This was planned. The crime scene itself was, as Detective Bobby Gray described it, sterile. No fingerprints, no casings, no DNA. Just a dead woman, a bullet-riddled car, and the question that would hang over everything that followed: why? A single witness emerged from the door-to-door canvass that night. The previous evening, she had heard what sounded like gunshots, and then looked out to see a figure walking away. Calm, unhurried, as if nothing had happened. She described a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, low haircut, average build. She was looking from 40 yards away. There wasn't much light. That was all she had. The medical examiner's report confirmed what the scene suggested. Pamela Clark had been shot 4 times. 3 bullets entered the left side of her torso, a 4th near the right armpit. 3 .40 caliber bullets were recovered from her body. The 4th was found lodged in the passenger seat of her car. All 4, .40 caliber, all 4, from the same weapon. Agents also noticed the car was cluttered with junk mail, bills, and miscellaneous letters, consistent with what her son told them. Pamela had a habit of sorting her mail in the car after picking it up from the mailbox. She did it every day. It was routine, predictable. And predictable, investigators knew, is exactly what killers rely on. The theory that emerged was methodical and grim. The killer had known Pamela Clark's routine. He had waited for her to arrive home from work on the evening of February 28, 2001, at around 7:30 p.m. He watched her settle into her familiar ritual, sorting her mail. And then he walked up to her window and shot her 4 times. Then he cleaned up after himself and disappeared into the night like he had never existed. No suspects, no leads, just bullets and questions. The investigation turned, as it always does, to motive. Detectives spent 15 days methodically combing through Pamela Clark's caseload, 70 to 100 probationers, each one a potential threat. Each one someone who had reason to resent a woman with the power to send them back to prison. Investigators interviewed each probationer individually. What they found surprised them. Pamela Clark was, almost universally, liked. Probationers who had committed violent crimes described her as fair, compassionate, almost a mother figure. Several of them were visibly emotional when told she had been murdered. But buried in the files, detectives found one name that stood out: Thomas Moulton, a probationer who lived in Pamela Clark's own neighborhood and who was about to have his probation revoked because he had failed a drug test. A man with motive, a man with proximity, a man who had studied, almost by accident, exactly where his probation officer lived and when she came home. Police compiled a photo lineup and showed it to the witness who had seen the figure walking away that night. She identified Thomas Moulton. It looked, for a moment, like the case was over. March 15, 2001, 2 weeks after Pamela Clark's murder. Police executed an arrest and search warrant on Moulton's home. During the search, they found a jacket matching the description the witness had given. They also found a box of 9mm bullets, not .40 caliber, but still alarming for someone who wasn't supposed to have ammunition at all. Then Moulton agreed to a polygraph. He agreed to questioning without a lawyer. He denied killing Pamela Clark. He said he had respected her. He explained the bullets were for a Smith & Wesson 9mm that had been stolen from him 6 months earlier. He said he couldn't remember his alibi for the night of February 28th. But when detectives pulled his phone records, they found something that cleared him completely. Thomas Moulton had been on the phone with his girlfriend during the exact window when Pamela Clark was murdered. He wasn't the killer. Dead end. And somewhere out there, the real killer was still free. April 8th, 2001. Over 5 weeks had passed since Pamela Clark's murder. East Point had begun to breathe again. It was an unusually warm spring evening. Temperatures in the low 70s. The kind of night that pulls people outside, opens their windows, makes a city feel alive. A retiree named Chuck Boiler heard someone approaching his home. "Who's out there? Who's out there?" The answer came through his door. A bullet shattered his arm and ripped into his chest. He fought back, but he was losing blood fast. The gunman didn't flee immediately. He lingered. Then he vanished. When police arrived and processed the scene, they found gunpowder residue around the door screen, meaning the shooter had pressed the weapon almost against the door before firing. This was not a drive-by. This was deliberate, close, personal. They recovered a shell casing, .40 caliber. And then they found something no one had seen before. A handwritten note, deliberately left at the scene. It read, "I was locked up for 6 weeks. Someone must pay." The reverse side was signed in yellow highlighter. The shooter called himself Jack. Less than an hour later, East Point police got another call. A man named Andrew Wilson, a janitor at a local hospital, had been shot in his car as he pulled up to an intersection just miles away. He stumbled out of his vehicle and desperately searched the neighborhood for help. By the time emergency services reached him, the damage was catastrophic. Within hours, Andrew Wilson was dead. At his scene, 5 shell casings, all .40 caliber. A witness nearby had watched a black male pacing back and forth on the street for 10 to 15 minutes before the shooting. She had found it strange enough to call police before it happened. She saw the car approach the intersection. She never saw the shooter's face, but she got a clear look at his vehicle, a late-model American car. She was firm on that detail, specific in a way that investigators believed. 2 shootings in one night, 1 injured, 1 dead, both .40 caliber, and a killer who had given himself a name. East Point had a serial shooter, April 12, 2001, 4 days after the double shooting. A woman was sitting alone in her East Point home, watching television, flipping through a magazine, completely unaware that a figure was approaching her window from outside. She didn't hear the shot over the sound of the TV. The first sign that anything was wrong was the bullet hole that appeared in her television set. The round had pierced the window, passed through the screen, and buried itself in the back of the TV. If the television hadn't been directly in the path of that bullet, investigators had no doubt she would be dead. Another note was recovered. This one read, "Better count your body bags. The bullet from the TV, .40 caliber." The FBI joined the investigation in full force. Agent Pete McFarlane, who had processed Pamela Clark's car weeks earlier, began cross-referencing the evidence across all the crime scenes. And then something stopped him cold. He remembered a note, a scrap of paper he had found inside Pamela Clark's cluttered car. At the time, he had assumed it was a child's scribble, something meaningless buried in the junk mail. But now, looking at it again alongside the notes left at the subsequent scenes, Eureka! That was the word he used. That's the word you want to use. Eureka. The same block lettering, the same yellow and orange highlighters, the same half sheet of standard white paper, torn by hand, leaving ragged edges. The same signature. Jack. Pamela Clark's murder hadn't been isolated. It had been the beginning. Investigators analyzed the notes for any potential motive. One phrase stood out. "I was locked up for 6 weeks for nothing." Detectives searched records for anyone named Jack who had recently served a 6-week sentence. Nothing. Jack's true identity and his true motive remained completely hidden. Police connected the 4 crime scenes and found only one geographic link. Every attack had occurred within the borders of East Point. Not Atlanta, right next door. Not College Park. Not any surrounding jurisdiction. Everything was centered precisely within this one city. East Point's entire population became potential targets. Police took an extraordinary step. They used a computer-automated system to dial every phone number in East Point. Every resident who answered heard a recorded warning. There is a serial shooter in your city. If you see anything suspicious, call immediately. The whole city held its breath. Officers had their leave canceled. Patrols were doubled. Investigators worked around the clock. But they knew the terrible truth. They were waiting for Jack to strike again, because they had no idea who he was or where he would appear next. A veteran FBI agent who had worked serial murder cases said it plainly to the team, "You're probably just going to have to sit back and wait for another one to happen." Nobody wanted to hear it, but everyone knew he was right. April 24th, 2001, 12 days later. 1:30 in the morning. Rosa Lewis pulled into her apartment complex after a long day and never made it inside. 4 bullets. Driver's side window. Left side of the torso. She fought to stay conscious as her roommate dialed 911. Investigators arrived to find 40 caliber shell casings, 4 of them, and evidence that the shooter had steadied his weapon across the roof of a nearby car to ensure he couldn't miss. He was so close, agents noted, that missing would have been almost impossible. There was no note at this scene, but what investigators found when they turned their attention to the victim herself changed everything. Rosa Lewis was a probation officer. She worked in the same office as Pamela Clark. They had been close friends. Suddenly, the random shooting spree didn't look random at all. 2 of the 5 victims were probation officers who knew each other personally, who worked side by side. This was not coincidence. This was the thread, the one thread that, if pulled, would unravel everything. Detectives went to Rosa Lewis's apartment and spoke with her roommate. They learned Rosa had recently divorced her husband, William Lewis, after a difficult marriage. The divorce had reportedly been amicable. Her ex-husband had even helped her move into the new apartment. There was no obvious reason to suspect him. But then investigators went to Rosa's workplace, to her desk. And inside that desk, they found a letter. Rosa Lewis had written it weeks before she was shot. If anything happened to her, the letter said, it was her ex-husband who was responsible. William Lewis had made threats, specific, chilling threats. He told her, "I know people. I know people who can do things to you. I know how to get rid of you. And then, I will blow your head off." The letter also implicated William Lewis in Pamela Clark's murder. Pamela had helped Rosa navigate the divorce. She had recommended a divorce attorney. That act of friendship had made William Lewis furious. Furious enough, Rosa wrote, that in his mind, Pamela Clark was the one who had stolen his wife. She had been his first target. And Pamela Clark was murdered the night before Rosa officially left her husband for good. But there was more. When investigators arrived at the apartment complex the morning after the shooting to notify Rosa's family, they watched a car pull into the parking lot. The car matched the description witnesses had given of a vehicle seen leaving the Andrew Wilson murder scene. The man behind the wheel was William Lewis. When detectives told him his ex-wife had been shot multiple times and might not survive, he showed no shock. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't say he needed to get to the hospital. He responded as if the news was, in the words of one detective, not really that significant. Police asked to search his car. He consented. Nothing found. It was a rental, he explained. He rented cars often, he said. Police asked to search his house. He agreed to that too. And in the bedroom, on top of his dresser, were several highlighter markers, yellow, orange. The same colors used to sign every note left at every crime scene by the shooter, who called himself Jack. William Lewis was brought downtown for questioning. During those 3 hours of interrogation, Lewis remained evasive. He made up stories about probationers who might have wanted to hurt his ex-wife. He called his own documented threats empty words. He had an explanation for everything, and none of the explanations held together. At 5 p.m. that day, detectives placed William Lewis under arrest for the shooting of his wife. But the case against him was still largely circumstantial. Highlighters are common. Rental cars prove nothing. A lack of emotion at bad news isn't a crime. Police needed more. They found it in the notes themselves. Forensic technicians dusted the handwritten notes for fingerprints. What they found were smudges, unreadable, unhelpful. But some of those smudges along the torn edges were different. They hadn't been made by fingers, they had been made by lips. The shooter had moistened the paper with his mouth before tearing it. A practical habit, wetting the fold to make a clean tear. But in doing so, he had left something behind that no amount of careful planning could undo. Saliva. With DNA. Investigators compared the DNA recovered from the notes with a sample taken from William Lewis. It matched. William Charles Lewis was Jack. Even though we didn't have a murder weapon from him, Agent McFarlane said, we had his DNA. His saliva is on these notes, and they're at 3 of the scenes. William Lewis was indicted on 26 counts. The district attorney sought the death penalty. Rosa Lewis emerged from her coma. After months of hospitalization, she eventually returned home. In September 2001, 5 months after she was nearly killed, she called police one more time. She had received a letter at her new address. She hadn't opened it. She wanted investigators to come get it first. It was from William Lewis. The letter was an apology, and it was a confession. In it, Lewis laid out the entire architecture of his cruelty. He explained that his first target had always been Pamela Clark, the woman he blamed for convincing his wife to leave him. He knew that killing her friend would cause Rosa deep pain. Then, to throw investigators off track, he shot random victims: Chuck Boiler, Andrew Wilson, the unnamed woman whose television saved her life. They were distractions, human beings used as props in a scheme to make police believe a random lunatic was prowling the streets, so no one would think to look at the quiet, cooperative ex-husband. Every note, every yellow highlighter signature, every ominous phrase. It was all performance, a calculated attempt to manufacture the profile of a deranged stranger. And for weeks it nearly worked. William Charles Lewis pleaded guilty to all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, plus 191 years with no possibility of parole. Investigators later gathered and asked themselves a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. If William Lewis hadn't been caught when he was, if Rosa Lewis had died that night in the parking lot, if the DNA on those notes had come back inconclusive, if that letter had never arrived, would he have stopped? The consensus was quiet and unanimous. No, he wouldn't have stopped. He would have kept manufacturing victims, kept leaving notes, kept playing the role of the mysterious Jack, prowling East Point's streets for reasons no one could explain, while the real reason sat in a quiet house, checking his phone, waiting to hear if his ex-wife had survived. Only William Lewis knows how many more random people would have died to keep that secret buried. The combined work of East Point Police, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI made sure the world never had to find out. Sometimes the most dangerous person in a victim's life isn't a stranger. Sometimes it's someone who knows exactly which mailbox she checks, exactly what time she gets home, and exactly how to make it look like someone else pulled the trigger.